Hello, this is 5 Minutes to Motion with Nathan Hunt. We are going to be doing a simple CIP axis for this. Whether for troubleshooting purposes or you're just getting started, this will be a great video for you. So once you have your program set up, it's just a matter of selecting your version and the controller and naming it. We can hop into this screen. So the first thing to do is add a module. So you click on the Ethernet tree, you say New Module. This is one of the new 5069 controllers, so you see there's 2 Ethernet ports that you can configure a little bit differently. So we're going to be putting in a Kinetix 5500 for this. So I like to search 2198. You can also search Kinetix 5900. So as you can see, 5700 is also popping up. So I'll add the H, and that should limit me. So as you can see here, the ERS2 module, that is a safety module. So that'll have safety over Ethernet. For now, I'm just going to do one of the regular ERS, which is a hardwired safety. So first thing we're going to call it, we'll just call this drive 1. You can either set the IP address here, you can set it in here. You can also do this on the front screen of whatever drive you're using. Let's just call this 5. One thing you'll note, if you do have a safety drive, you'll have the option to also configure this for a different safety. So for an example, on a Kinetix 5700, an ERS3, which is kind of the base model, you have the option to either do hardwired or integrated safety over Ethernet. So this one, the 5500, it is built into the part number. You can't select safety over Ethernet with a regular ERS. That would be an ERS2. So something to keep in mind. And this is where you change your revisions and stuff like that. All right. Not inhibited. That's something to always check if your motion is stopping every once in a while. And no associated axis yet. So after we build an axis in our motion group, we'll be able to see that here. We can start to build that out, but we're not going to. For the 5500 specifically, that can either run on 240 or 480 volt. So it's worth checking within here. And it can also run on single phase for the lower 3 models, so the H003, H008, and H15. And this is where, for example, on the Kinetix 5500, you have a lot of different sharing configurations. We're just going to be making this a standalone for now. But this is some place you can also screw things up. And you can disable this, and you can put in your shunts and stuff like that here as well. Something to note, if you have a system that you're just testing out, oftentimes you won't actually have any digital inputs, so we want to make sure that one is blank as well. We shouldn't have to mess with it since we're not actually connecting. But if you do have a system that doesn't have any I/O created there, you want to make sure to set that up properly. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new motion group. And one thing to note is you do have to have your axes within a group. So I'm going to create a new CIP drive. I'll just call this axis 1. Now you can either double click it or you can right click it and go to properties. I oftentimes double click, but I'll show you. One thing to note, if you are troubleshooting something or if you're only working with one axis at a time, and maybe you have the other drive disconnected, if you have multiple axes, you can drag and drop that axis into the ungrouped so it doesn't cause weird errors. So now we will associate this with the module. One thing I'll note here is in the Kinetix 5700, the second axis, the physical axis, is actually associated with axis 3 here. It's kind of confusing. It doesn't pop up. Even within the safety modules, it's when you hop into safety tags, it's called axis 2 for the second physical axis. So just keep that in mind. Next thing, now once we have that in, now we can associate a catalog number. So in fact, if you don't have it associated with one of the drives, you cannot select catalog number. We're just going to pick something here. You can filter by voltage, family, all sorts of stuff. And you'll even notice there's some TPMs, for example. That's a Wittenstein motor. So some of our really close partners will have stuff in here. Let's just go with VP. Why not a VPF? So one thing I'll note, this is perhaps the most common place to get screwed up, is if you have the wrong encoder type selected. So make sure this part matches exactly what you have on your motor. So like, for example, this is a VPF. It'd be very easy to miss if in reality I'm using a VPL. I'm not actually connected to anything, so I'm putting whatever, but make sure this is correct. It's the most common place I see customers screw up. All right, we'll go ahead and hit apply. And this is where you also will put in if you're using an induction motor, but we are not doing that here. All right, next, this is where we put our scaling. So direct rotary, right? If I want to control this in degrees, so if I'm ever doing my motion axis moves or whatever, I can type this in as 360. If I want to control this in degrees, what degrees? I can call it whatever I want, and I can make the scale whatever I want. This is kind of nice, but if you would rather keep it in revolutions, that's your prerogative. You can also add a transmission. So, for example, if you're using a helical gearbox, oftentimes there's a really funky ratio, right? It might be like a 517 to 31. So you can put those in to get more of an exact ratio. Similarly, with linear actuator, so we might still have a gearbox on there, but then you might have a screw drive, and then you can say, you know, I have this many inches per rev, or I have this many millimeters per rev. Let's call it 6, and that way, for my scaling, I can control it in millimeters. And again, if you see here, this changed to millimeters, load millimeters, so I probably actually just want to keep that. If you wanted to go something beyond that, let's say I wanted to control it in meters, but this doesn't really give me the chance for meters, right? I can say there's, you know, 0.001 meters per 1 millimeter. So something else you can do. You can also set soft travel limits in here. Next, we'll jump into the tuning. So this is where you'll select your different application types. A lot of the times with servos, we're doing point to point and stuff like that. However, for the newer drives, this will be different for a little Kinetix 350, for example, that doesn't have load observer. But typically, I would say do custom. You want to deselect the torque pass filter. You don't have to mess with any of this. That should stay the same. We're not going to do a bump test like you might normally do when you're auto tuning, for example, a Kinetix 350. Then we will go into the load observer tab. We'll go to load observer with velocity estimate. So that was load under observer. I know I jump around a lot. That'll auto populate once we get things rolling. And don't be afraid, if your system is tuned really hot, don't be afraid to jump this down. I've had very large systems that I take down to 5 hertz on this because I don't really need it to change that much. And then I'll also do tracking notch. Something to note, if you have an uncoupled motor or very light coupling, gain stabilization will throw you out of whack. So tracking notch, go ahead, hit apply. And you're pretty much ready to go. That's really all it takes. Now from here, something that I find very helpful is go to motion direct commands. So motion servo on, that'll enable your drive. And then I will oftentimes just do an MAJ or an MAM. When you are doing these, make sure if you're not homed, you want to do an incremental move. But then you can also jump around different axes, right? I can select, axis 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, if I'm jogging different axes. And note, if you are doing troubleshooting with this, it is much better to have the hardware in front of you so you can check the encoder part number. You can see if there are any digital inputs, for example. You can see on the 5500 how your DC bus and AC bus are configured, because there's any number of ways, given that it's a hybrid solution. So make sure you have the hardware in front of you when you're doing this. You can also sometimes, if you're on a safety module, for example, your ERS2 with Kinetix 5500 or any of the advanced safety or safety over Ethernet with the 5700, it's much better to have the hardware in front of you because it's a little easier, frankly, to reset safety on that than software-wise. So that's all I have. Again, this is Nathan Hunt with the Solcon Network here in Nebraska, and thank you for watching.